First and absolutely foremost, happy birthday to my mom. June 1st, mom's birthday. Happy birthday, mom. Throwback Thursday, so you know we have some entertaining and perhaps enlightening throwback Blue Jays stories that perhaps you've not heard before. And since the Blue Jays are finishing their series with Milwaukee this afternoon, we have Throwback Thursday Blue Jays Brewer stories. And as the Jays head to New York this weekend to take on the surging New York Mets, we've got some fun Jays Mets throwback stories too. Now, first thing we'll do is get you set for today's rubber match, Kevin Gausman versus Freddie Peralta.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Yes, indeed, I am locked on the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm a longtime Toronto Blue Jay fan. Absolutely appreciate you spending part of your day talking Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. Hit that like, that follow, that subscribe, drop the comment, help Locked On Blue Jays grow. For those of you becoming everydayers as well, making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast, listen every single day. I see you, and I absolutely thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the season getting better, right? I know it's a winning team right now, but truth be told, it's a last place team. Again, if I say truth be told, we've had higher expectations than where we are so far. Now, everydayers will recall, of course, that we've spoken many times throughout this season about what an absolute bear the beginning of this season is. It is wow. The second half of the season significantly more in the favor of the Toronto Blue Jays. So just need to tread water. Can't get left behind. And that may be happening already in the division. But as far as the playoffs, just need to stick around and then get ready to make that run in the second half. Now, of course, a Throwback Thursday. So a segment going to have some great Throwback Thursday stories when it comes to Blue Jays Brewers. And the Blue Jays head to, the schedule again, right? Worst time to face the New York Mets. So they're finally getting hot now. Now the Blue Jays have them on their schedule. Okay, so heading into New York on the weekend. So in the final segment, we'll have some Throwback Thursday Mets Blue Jays talk as well. Let's get into the game for today. It's the rubber match. Again, everydayers are going to know. I predicted the Blue Jays would sweep this series. I'm surprised. I know the offense has really been scuffling lately. They had that 20-run explosion last Tuesday. Well, remember, the Blue Jays had 19 total runs the 6 games leading up to that 20-run explosion. And immediately following that 20 runs, in the 7 games since, Blue Jays have totaled 28 runs. Should I say just 28 runs? Remember, even in this Milwaukee series, the Blue Jays scored 7 runs in the first 3 innings. I was at that Tuesday night game. They scored 7 runs in the first 3 innings and then nothing the rest of the game, and just 2 runs in last night's loss. So over their last 14 innings, in front of the home crowd, right, where they should be hitting at home, should be doing significantly better, right? Witt still looking for his first Rogers Center home run. Vlad still looking for his first Rogers Center home run. Holy moly, last 14 innings, 2 runs. Wow. Going to need to be much better. And remember, this is Kevin Gausman. The Blue Jays average like 3 runs per game for Kevin Gausman. So my goodness. But let's get into this pitching matchup here now. Kevin Gausman, outside of those 2 starts, remember he gave up those 7 runs in that first inning at Houston, was bad in that start, and he gave up the 5 runs in that second inning at Boston. So outside of those 2 starts, you've got 9 starts that Kevin Gausman has made this season. He's totaled 60 1/3 innings over those 9 starts, just 8 earned runs. It's a 1.19 ERA. Holy moly. In those 60 1/3 innings, how about 80 strikeouts for Kevin Gausman? My goodness. 5 games so far already this season. He's had at least 9 strikeouts. In there as well, by the way, is a career-high 13 strikeout performance by Kevin Gausman. Opponents hitting 186 versus his splitter. Is that good? Kevin Gausman has generated 50 strikeouts this season with the splitter as the strike 3 pitch. How many pitchers don't even have 50 strikeouts, period, this season? Kevin Gausman's got 50 on the splitter alone. It's a top-tier pitch in all of baseball. Now, the Blue Jays did lose 4 of Gausman's 5 May starts. Again, 3 runs per game, right? That's an issue. Now, traditionally, here's something to watch now, because I've been really pleased. We just went over the numbers outside of those 2 starts, how good Gausman's been. But traditionally, Kevin Gausman has really struggled in the months of June and July. So let's watch that very closely here. Now, as far as this game's concerned, no current Brewer has ever homered off Kevin Gausman. Owen Miller and Brian Anderson, these are the 2 to watch in this game today. They're a combined 6 for 16 in their careers against Kevin Gausman. The rest of the Milwaukee Brewers combined 1 for 19 versus Kevin Gausman. Wow. Christian Yelich, 1 for 9 with 4 strikeouts. Wow. So Gausman has dominated outside of Owen Miller and Brian Anderson. Now, this season, Miller is hitting righties. He's hitting on the road. Anderson is hitting righties as well. Now, he's struggling. You would say he's struggling. This is his first season in Milwaukee. Remember Anderson, that long-time Miami Marlin. But Owen Miller and Brian Anderson, they're the two to watch for Kevin Gausman today. For Gausman, this will be his 7th day start of the season. In his previous 6 day starts, 40 innings pitched, 2 runs allowed. Pardon? 40 innings pitched, 2 runs allowed. It's a 0.45 ERA in his 6 day starts. Wow. Freddie Peralta on the mound for Milwaukee. Freddie Peralta, breakout season in 2021, just 9-8 since then. This will be his first ever start at Rogers Center. Now, Freddie Peralta's done some fine work in his day starts as well. He's 4-1 with a 3.41 ERA in his day starts. 5 of his last 8 Milwaukee starts, they've given them 3 runs or fewer. So, hey, FanDuel's a sponsor of the show here. If you take, I'll be looking at the under in this game this afternoon. At 2 of his last 3 starts, in fact, for Freddie Peralta, my goodness, I would like this to become 3 of his last 4 starts, because watch this. 2 of Freddie Peralta's last 3 starts, Milwaukee has lost one of them 18-1 to St. Louis and 15-1 to San Francisco. That was his last time out, actually, that 15-1 game. Wow. Brewers have won just 1 of Peralta's 4 road starts. And now, it is worth mentioning that last win was his last road start. I will say that, and I say it's worth mentioning because it was his last road start, yes, but it was against Tampa Bay, at Tampa Bay. You know, the Rays have been just eye pop emoji this season, right? But in particular at home, they're 26-6. Well, one of the 6 losses was the last time we saw Freddie Peralta on the road. Okay. And in that particular game as well, he had all his pitches working, had a really nice mix going, and was a ground ball machine, something we don't want to see this afternoon at the Rogers Center. Heavy fastballs. You'll see a lot of fastballs from Freddie Peralta. He runs it up there in the mid to high 90s. Now, interesting to see, because we know that even with these Blue Jays struggling offensively, we know they can still deal with a fastball. They can still do damage to a fastball, in particular someone like Kevin Kiermaier. So I'll be interested to see if he's in the game. Remember, this is a day game after a night game. He's been injured or at least, hobbling, at least hampered the last few days. So I'm interested to see if Kevin Kiermaier is in the lineup today. Peralta will mix in a slider, a curve, and a changeup, but it's going to be a heavy. Blue Jays need to go up there looking for that fastball. It's going to be a heavy, heavy dose, a heavy diet of the fastballs tonight. He's only ever faced, not a lot of Jays have faced Freddie Peralta. He's only ever faced Tyler Heineman once. He faced Varsho once. He's faced Witt 4 times. Now, these Blue Jays are 0 for 6 against them. Okay. You know what's really odd is he faced Kevin Gausman. Of course, pitchers used to hit, right? He's actually faced Kevin Gausman twice, got him out once, and walked him once. Reminder that you can catch today's Blue Jays Brewers game on SiriusXM. Now, coming up on Locked On Blue Jays, we get into some Throwback Thursday stories about the Blue Jays and Brewers. And in our last segment, we'll look at some Throwback Thursday stories about the Blue Jays and the New York Mets, as the Blue Jays heading to New York for a weekend series with the Mets starting tomorrow. Now, first, I'm often asked about, Craig, do you like to go to the Blue Jay games? Do you go to the games? How do you get your tickets? Where do you get your tickets? And I never did really like going. I love the renovations now. And I never had a good answer for, how to get the tickets, where to get the tickets. Well, I do now. Game Time, the Game Time app, gametime.co. Buying tickets to your favorite events, it shouldn't be stressful, right? And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Killer deals on last-minute tickets. You get the best price guarantee, and you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you're going to have. There's the Jansen and Romano bobblehead. Use the Game Time app. Super easy to use the app. Get into the game. Got that bobblehead. I mentioned earlier on this episode, I was at the game on Tuesday using the Game Time app, and I'm looking to go. I think I'll go to one of the games during the Houston series as well. I just really appreciate how easy it is. Literally 2 clicks and you're all set. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason, right? I really like the Game Time guarantee. Now, the Game Time guarantee means you always get the best prices. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now on Throwback Thursday, let's take a look at the relationship or the history of the Milwaukee Brewers and the Toronto Blue Jays. Everydayers will know, you've heard me say before, that the Milwaukee Brewers were back in the day what the Tampa Bay Rays are these days. And you know, Tampa Bay Rays, we've been through this before, right? The first 5 seasons of the Rays' existence, Jays won the season series every single time. In the 20 seasons since, Blue Jays have won the season series versus the Rays just 4 times. It's never mattered who was on, what the rosters were, what the pitching matchups were, who was playing well at that time, what place was everyone. Nothing's ever mattered. The Rays always are a nightmare for the Toronto Blue Jays. Well, that's how the Milwaukee Brewers used to be for the Toronto Blue Jays. And if you're old enough to remember, the Brewers were in the American League East with the Jays for years and years and years. It used to be American League East, American League West, National League East, National League West, and you won your division or you went home, right? There was no wild card, nothing like that. And the Milwaukee Brewers, Detroit Tigers, there's a lot of teams that aren't in the AL East anymore that were longtime rivals of the Blue Jays in the American League East. None more detrimental than the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, 27 seasons. So the Blue Jays, this is their 47th season of existence, but of course haven't played the Brewers every single one of those years. Have played the Brewers 27 seasons, over the 27 seasons, have won the season series with the Milwaukee Brewers. Those 27 seasons have won the season series 5 times. 5 times. In the 70s, the Blue Jays went 13-30. That was an expansion team, right? So that's understandable, right? But as the Blue Jays, really started picking up steam, really became a legitimate franchise, a legitimate team in the 80s and 90s, still massive losing record to the Milwaukee Brewers, 101 and 123 in the 80s and the 90s, Blue Jays versus the Brewers, right? Is this sounding Jays versus Rays to you, right? You see what I mean, man? The Milwaukee Brewers are the originators of the bolt head. The Tampa Bay Rays make it so there's no regrowth happening, right? But the Milwaukee Brewers, they were the originators of it. My goodness. How about some traditional Milwaukee Brewers, studs? How have they done versus the Blue Jays? Christian Yelich just 240 with 1 career home run in 8 games versus the Toronto Blue Jays. Blue Jays have held him down. Rowdy Tellez, 2 for 11 versus the Toronto Blue Jays. Both home runs were against Jose Barrios last season in Milwaukee. So, I mean, easy to cheer for Rowdy, right? But easy, Rowdy. Not 1, but 2 home runs in a game against the Blue Jays. Hey, easy there, big fella. How about Corbin Burns? Corbin Burns, top 7 in Cy Young the last 3 seasons, including winning a Cy Young in there, by the way. He's had just 1 start ever versus the Toronto Blue Jays. It was last season, and it was a good one, as you can imagine. 7 2/3 innings, 9 strikeouts. In that particular game, Kevin Biggio led off. Teo played, Tapia played, Zimmer played, Lourdes played, Moreno played. So even if the Blue Jays were going to see Corbin Burns in this series, which thankfully they didn't, right? Just the way the schedule worked out. Finally, the schedule's been so difficult, right? Finally the schedule, it's been giving so much taketh away. Finally, the schedule giveth, as the Blue Jays do get to avoid or do get to miss Corbin Burns this time around. And Corbin Burns in that particular game, if you take your minds back, if you remember that game last season with Milwaukee and the Blue Jays, Corbin Burns, again, that gem, but the best pitcher that day for the Toronto Blue Jays, as Yusei Kikuchi got rocked early on, it was Max Castillo. It was his 2nd ever game. This is a real feel-good story. This was his coming out party. He pitched 4 innings, shutout innings, 7 strikeouts. We were all starting to get really excited about Max Castillo, right? Now, ultimately, he would be part of that Whit Merrifield trade, which hopefully is going to work out for all parties involved, of course. Now, if you're talking, Toronto Blue Jays and Milwaukee Brewers, and you're talking traditionally speaking, well, of course, Paul Molitor is going to be in there. How did he do versus the Toronto Blue Jays? 197 games versus the Toronto Blue Jays. Again, there was no interleague, right? So you played the American League East and you played the American League West. That's it. When Molitor spent all those seasons in Milwaukee, that's it. 197 games, 287 average, 351 on base, and a 784 OPS. None of those numbers are to be sneezed at. None of those numbers are bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they are all well below Paul Molitor's career averages, and they're all well below Paul Molitor. So the Blue Jays actually were effective over the years against Paul Molitor. Not so much against Robin Yount. Robin Yount played over 200 games versus the Toronto Blue Jays. 330 career average in 200 games. That's a massive sample size. 330 with a 901 OPS. Robin Yount, goodness, he started out as a shortstop, then ended up being a center fielder for several seasons for Milwaukee, and oh my gosh, he was awesome, and clearly against the Jays, he was awesome. Those teams as well, if you're around for those teams, you remember they had that first baseman, Cecil Cooper, always a very good hitter, a left-handed hitter, always a force at the plate. He was 302 in his career against the Toronto Blue Jays, so Cooper did to the Blue Jays what he did to many teams, which was he hit. How about Rolly Fingers? Rolly Fingers, the closer, the mustachioed closer, right? Spent most of his time with the Oakland A's, sure, but did spend some good seasons there with the Milwaukee Brewers. George Bell, my favorite Toronto Blue Jay ever. George Bell, the only Blue Jay ever to hit a home run off of Rolly Fingers. That brings us to the 1987 meltdown. We're talking Throwback Thursday right now. One of these days, we are going to deep dive the last 3 games of the season for the Toronto Blue Jays in the 1987 season. I mean, long story short, basically, would you believe one of the great collapses in baseball history was authored by your Toronto Blue Jays? It was in 1987. The last 7 games of the season, the 96-win Toronto Blue Jays needed to win 1 of the last 7 games of the season. Again, 87, right? 2 divisions in each league, no wild card. You win your division or you go home. Blue Jays would on Friday, September the 25th, down 2-0 in the bottom of the 9th against the Tigers. They would rally for 3 and the walk-off. The very next day, Saturday, September 26th, down 9-7 to the Tigers, bottom of the 9th, rally for 3 and the walk-off. Now there's 1 week left in the season, and if that's 96 wins now for the Jays with a week left in the season. If they win 1 game, the final 7 games, if they win once, they win the American League East. And to be totally honest with you, I don't even think this is my homerism showing here, my Jays fandom showing here. Probably we're going to win the whole darn thing. Wow. Holy moly. They would lose that last game of that Detroit series that Sunday. So now they've got 6 games left, just need to win 1. It's 3 at home against Milwaukee and then 3 in Detroit. And Detroit's the team chasing the Blue Jays for second place. Well, of course, Milwaukee, third place team. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Records didn't matter. What was that? Nothing mattered. Jays needed to win. Nothing mattered. Milwaukee was the Rays. They beat the Jays every single time. So Jays need 1 win in this Milwaukee series or 1 in the Detroit series. But here's the Milwaukee series first. The first game of that series, Paul Molitor, key home run in a 6-4 Bluer victory. They beat Mike Flanagan. Second game, the 17-6 with an ERA at 2.5, Jimmy Key, stud, absolute star, Jimmy Key on the mound against Chris Bosio, who is 10-7 with an ERA in the 5s. What could go wrong, right? Again, doesn't matter who's pitching, nothing matters. Milwaukee was a thorn in the side of the Toronto Blue Jays. Paul Molitor again with the key hit. Jimmy Key gets rocked. Chris Bosio throws a complete game gem. Okay, how does that make any sense at all? Like only Milwaukee's third and final game of the series. Dave Stieb against Juan Nieves. Paul Molitor, stop me if you've heard this, right? Again, with a great game for Milwaukee. He draws 3 walks, scores twice. It's a 5-2 Milwaukee victory. Juan Nieves, his ERA was in the 5s, just like Chris Bosio the day before. Dave Stieb didn't get out of the 5th inning. And Juan Nieves, just like Chris Bosio the day before, complete game gem. Are you absolutely kidding me right now? Are you absolutely kidding me? I mean, we'll get into the Detroit series at a Throwback Thursday later on just to complete the absolute meltdown. I mean, you can see where I'm going with it, right? There's spoiler alert. They lost all 3 games in the Detroit series as well by 1 run. Every game an absolute heartbreaker. Every game. I was going to say every game's its own story. We'll get into that at another Throwback Thursday. So the 1987 Blue Jays would miss the playoffs by 1 game. All told that season, they went 4-9 against the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, final segment on the Throwback Thursday with the Blue Jays heading to New York for a 3-game weekend series against the New York Mets. I know, at home, 3-game road trip against the Mets, then back home for another bear of a week. This whole everydayers will know, right? We've talked about the schedule, many times here on Locked On Blue Jays. The first half schedule is as difficult a first half of a season schedule as I've ever seen. And a lot of it is just happenstance, right? We know that. A lot of it is simply because of the renovations and things like that. Like, absolutely legit. There's nothing nefarious here by Major League. I mean, nothing like that, right? But still, the results are what the results are. Extremely difficult schedule. Blue Jays smack dab in the middle of it as they're going to head to New York, which is the New York Mets all of a sudden playing very good baseball. Not the time to be running into the New York Mets. But anyway, we'll look at that and we'll deep deep dive the weekend series on tomorrow's Locked On Blue Jays. For today, let's finish by looking at who my lineup would be. And now this is a lineup of players who have played for the Toronto Blue Jays and for the New York Mets. This is two great franchises to compare for something like this because there's a lot of crossover and a lot of fantastic crossover between these two organizations. Let's start at first base. I've got John Olerud at first base. Played for the Mets, played for the Blue Jays. Now, Craig, so did Carlos Delgado. You're screaming at me right now. You're absolutely right. Now, of course, I've got Carlos Del Suato at my DH spot. John Olerud with the 3 Gold Gloves, that's what sets him apart here. I mean, how can I go wrong either way, right? But I'm gonna get the bat of John Olerud and the defense of John Olerud and still have Carlos Delgado in my back pocket as my DH. Oh my goodness. The first base spot, needless to say, is the strongest of these positions. Second base, how about Jeff Kent? Jeff Kent started his career in Toronto, traded to the Mets for David Cohn. What a monumental trade that is in Toronto Blue Jay franchise history, right? Are the Jays the champs in 92 if there's no David Cohn? I mean, no, right? Now, Jeff Kent would go on to his stardom with the Giants. So ironically, started his career with the Blue Jays and the Mets, but really, really kicked things into that next level when he went over to the Giants, right? Hated Barry Bonds, but of course, Bonds hit third and Jeff Kent hit fourth for many successful seasons out there in San Francisco. So Jeff Kent at second base. At third base, I've got Edgardo Alfonso. Now, many top 15 MVP finishes as a New York Met, and I get lucky here because his career ended in 2006 as a Toronto Blue Jay, played the last dozen games of the season of his career for the Toronto Blue Jays. So I do get lucky there. I can use Edgardo Alfonso. If you're old enough to remember him as a Met, man, very steady, very good third baseman, a very good offensive third baseman for many years for the New York Mets. At shortstop, I mean, Molitor and Delgado was easy, right? Shortstop's easy. Tony Fernandez. Everydayers will know how often anytime we see an opportunity where we can talk about and praise Tony Fernandez, we take it. Love Tony Fernandez, one of the favorite Blue Jays in this fan base ever. A 4-time Blue Jay, and one of those was in 93. Now, the Mets had brought him in. Remember, he was a part of that huge trade, of course, that brought Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter to the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, the Padres would end up trading him after the 92 season to the Mets. In 93, he was just off to a terrible start with the Mets. He had played, 48 games. He was hitting like 225. Oh my goodness. So Blue Jays reacquired him. Well, he would go on to play 94 games, for the 93 Toronto Blue Jays, hitting 308. And how huge, should we use the word massive? Yeah, how massive was Tony Fernandez in the 1993 World Series for the Toronto Blue Jays? I mean, we talked about Paul Molitor earlier. Did the Jays win the 93 World Series without Paul Molitor? He's the MVP. Of course they do not, but you can also say the same about Tony Fernandez. Tony Fernandez set offensive records for shortstops in the World Series, in the 93 World Series. He was sensational. The catcher, Charlie O'Brien. I'm thrilled to be able to highlight Charlie O'Brien. He played for the Mets. He played for the Blue Jays. One of my favorite Blue Jays ever. And the reason being, Charlie O'Brien, as a Blue Jay, it was in the 96 season, he took the back-to-back foul tips off the mask. Now, Charlie O'Brien, for those of you, young enough you'll think that the catcher mask, that goalie style catcher mask, is the catcher mask, has always been the catcher mask. But you may even know that prior to that, forever in baseball, it wasn't. It was this guy right here. Oh, Bo just fell. That's okay. Remember, it was this thing right here. The helmet would go on with, you had the padding and everything inside. The helmet would go on, and then the mask affixed on top of that, right? And on foul balls or anything like that, you'd throw off the mask, toss it, get it the heck out of there, and try to make the play. Charlie O'Brien, let's put this back up here. Shout out to Big Nish. That's a Big Nish design right there as well. Charlie O'Brien, back-to-back foul tips to the face, realizes, my gosh, there's got to be a better way. Now, he's in Toronto now, right? He's fresh off his 95 World Series win with the Atlanta Braves, by the way, so he's just on fire in his life right now. In Toronto, hockey-centric, sees the hockey masks, partners with Van Velden Masks Incorporated. That's a company here in Hamilton. Another reason why I'm so proud. This is all Canadian done, and they create the goalie-style mask that how many of the catchers, almost all of them, use to this day. It was called the All-Star MVP. That's what they called it. Major League Baseball approved it in that 96 season, and the rest is history. Charlie O'Brien, as a Toronto Blue Jay, using a Toronto company, revolutionized the way baseball is played, in particular, the safety of the game of baseball. I think that is epically cool. Let's turn our attention to the outfield. Out in left field, Ricky Henderson. Man, now I get lucky here because Ricky Henderson was in the majors for like 25 parts of like 25 seasons. We know Ricky Henderson was incredible. Didn't play much for the Jays or the Mets, but did play for both, so he fits into this category, right? He played only 196 of his 3,081 games with the Blue Jays and Mets, sorry. Stole only 64 of his 1,400 plus stolen bases with the Mets and the Blue Jays. Now, the Mets, of course, didn't get a whole lot of goodness from Ricky Henderson. And on the surface, his numbers with the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays will underwhelm you. In particular, his World Series numbers will underwhelm you. But if you were around for those teams, then you know this guy was massive. I've already said, do the Jays win the 93 World Series if it's not for Molitor and Fernandez? So maybe I'm pushing, maybe I'm going too far right now, but I'm going to ask it again. Do they win that World Series if it wasn't for the contributions? Because Ricky Henderson was really good. Numbers-wise, no, but as spark plug-wise, Ricky Henderson was really good for the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays. Speaking of spark plugs, how about in center field, Mookie Wilson? 12 Major League Baseball seasons, all of them with the Mets and the Blue Jays. In the 1989 trade deadline, the Blue Jays acquired Mookie from the Mets. He was the absolute spark that led the Blue Jays to that 89 playoffs. The Blue Jays make the playoffs in 89. When Mookie Wilson walks in the door, they weren't in a playoff spot. Again, I'm going to remind you, that was just with the 4 divisions, right? You won your AL East, AL West, NL East, NL West. You win your division or you go home. The Blue Jays were a good team in 89, had that Cito Gaston magic going, but weren't in a playoff spot. Mookie Wilson came in. Again, I'm going to say, if you look at the numbers, you might be a little underwhelmed with that. But if you are around for that team and that season, then he was absolutely the spark that got them to the playoffs. Mookie Wilson was a Blue Jay for 3 seasons, and 2 of them, they were playoff teams. I mean, love Mookie Wilson. Mookie Wilson, of course, in Mets lore, the famous 1986 World Series where Bill Buckner, the Red Sox first baseman, on the 3rd out to win the World Series in Game 6 for the Red Sox, had that ball go between his legs. That was Mookie Wilson that hit that ball. Out in right field, Jose Bautista. After a decade with the Blue Jays that ended in 2017, Bautista would play for 3 different teams trying to keep his career going in 2018. It didn't work out, of course. Now, the Mets were one of those teams, Atlanta, the Mets, and Philly. Now, all told, in that 2018 season, just a 203 average. I mean, Jose Bautista was done. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, a fellow Blue Jay fan, and there was something I was looking at for Jose Bautista to deep dive. I don't remember what it was now, but I was really, really surprised. Of course, I knew Jose Bautista was a good Blue Jay for a long time, but the longevity, I see why he's getting a spot in the level of excellence. The longevity is extremely impressive from Bautista. A decade as a Toronto Blue Jay. In 2010 and 2011, he was having those video game seasons where he was just hitting home runs all over the place, leading league. Both those years, like just incredible, right? Then you fast forward to 2015 and 2016. He's one of the best Blue Jays in those playoffs as well. Not just the bat flip, other moments that he had in those playoffs as well. So Jose Bautista, yeah, tip of the cap to Jose Bautista. DH, of course, mentioned Carlos Delgado, a 3-time top 12 MVP as a Blue Jay, 2-time top 12 MVP as a Met. He's the one on this list that really was awesome for both franchises and for the Mets as well. The only time Delgado played, I believe it was the only playoffs he ever made, was the 2006 with the Mets, and he was awesome in that playoff series for the New York Mets. Well, Craig Shirley, you have a pitching staff. Hey, don't call me Shirley. And yes, absolutely, I've got a pitching staff. We're going to start with someone we've mentioned already, David Cone. David Cone is at the top of this rotation. I hate to say that Marcus Stroman, the Stro Show, is also at the top of this rotation. I've got Steven Matz bringing me some balance as a lefty in this rotation. All 3 of these players, of course, prominent with the Mets and the Blue Jays over the years. How about last year's New York Met, this year's Toronto Blue Jay, the Hound on the mound? How about Chris Bassett in my 4 slot there? Maybe even in my 3 slot ahead of Matz, right? But Chris Bassett settling somewhere into this rotation nicely. And I was tempted to go with R.A. Dickey because he's an innings eater, so strategically I could see value there. I'm not a big R.A. Dickey fan, so I'm going to go Al Leiter. Al Leiter, and speaking of a lefty, right, there's some more balance for my rotation there. Leiter spent part of 7 seasons with the Mets. Al Leiter spent part of 7 seasons with the Blue Jays. Now, certainly his best years were with the New York Mets, but 2 of those 7 seasons with the Blue Jays were in 1992 and 1993. So Al Leiter has a pair of World Series rings with the Toronto Blue Jays. And at the closer, I'll go Brad Hand. I'm joking. I'm of course joking. I know he's a 4-letter word. Well, Hand is a 4-letter word, but you know what I mean. I'm of course joking. I am going to go Miguel Bautista as my closer. Miguel Bautista, do you remember him? He's a guy that spent part of 18 seasons on the big league level, just 2 with the Mets and just 2 with the Jays. But the only season he ever had in his career as a closer was with the Blue Jays. Remember, he had 31 saves for the Blue Jays in 2005. In fact, he had 41 saves in his entire career. 36 of those 41 yeah, we're with the Toronto Blue Jays.